Hey, what's up, y'all? We're back with another one. So this is the part 2 to the JavaScript ES6 crash course, and what JavaScript tutorial would be complete without talking about loops. And so the last video I went over was syntax fundamentals and functions, things like that, and some function methods. Well, actually, we're going to be getting into quite a few function methods here, so let's get started. So loops. Let's start off with the for loop. So a few of these loops actually have not changed at all since the ES6 came around. So the only difference was instead of for var, we just use let, and basically we get the same effect. So this iterates 5 times because the index starts at 0. And a for loop is actually one of the most efficient loops that there is. You can't really go wrong with the for loop, especially when you're dealing with big data sets and things like that. So the efficiency of a loop is maybe not something you'll always have to consider, but it's definitely something you should think about. So look, if we take a look at the efficiency of different loops. So the for loop is generally the most efficient option for iterating over arrays, and array, like they're saying, is objects, because arrays and objects are iterable. You can iterate over them when you know the number of iterations in advance. So in this case, they were using array.length. In this case, we're not talking about a specific array. We're just looping through the whatever's less than 5. So yeah, so the for loop hasn't really changed. And then, so let's talk about the while loop. So the while loop, this one iterates 5 times as well. So this iterates as long as the condition is met. So it's similar to the for loop, but we're basically setting it to a specific condition, whereas with a for loop, we were just, in a way, I guess, in a way, I guess it is a condition too, but the while loop is slightly different in the sense that this for loop will continue iterating over it. The while loop will discontinue if at some point during the looping it meets the condition, whereas the for loop doesn't have that. So as you can see, it works. And then the difference between ES6 and normal JavaScript is negligible. Instead of the var, we use the let. So yeah, there's not much difference. Now there's the do while loop. So this is similar to the while loop, except in this case 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I didn't put this little portion here, but it's basically saying do this while this. So it's almost like the opposite of a while loop. Now I don't use too many of these, but yeah, we have the do while loop. Now we also have the for in loop. So the for in loop, so it iterates, that's what you call it when the loop runs. It iterates over the enumerable properties of an object. So it's talking about, so in this case, the object has a key and a value. All right, so it's going to loop over. So if the object has an array, another object, it'll loop over it. That's what an enumerable property is. So in this case, we would write for let key. So this syntax also is the same as normal JavaScript with ES6. The only difference is instead of let. In the old version you put var, but you were saying for let key in object. Okay, console.log key and then the object key. So what we get is, yep, it's looping over each property, and yeah, and it's giving it side by side the values. So that's the for in loop. And if we look at this, so the while loop, okay, so we're not quite there. So next one, we are looking at the for of loop. Now this one was introduced in ES6. So the for of loop is specific for ES6 and iterates over iterable objects. So it looks similar to the for in loop. And if we see here, introduced in ES6, provides a cleaner syntax for iterating over iterable objects. It's slightly less efficient, but the performance difference is usually negligible. So that means the data set that it's looping over is not substantially large, but because there's some memory leak. But in this case, yeah, so here's the interesting thing. So the for in loop, as you saw in the last what we went over last, is that it's iterating over an object. A lot of these other loops aren't necessarily made to. There's some loops like this, like the for of loop, which is specifically for iterating over arrays, and this is even strings and object sets. So yeah, so for const value of r, and as you can see here with the for in, so that's in, and this one has the of keyword, and then we just, yep, so we get 1, 2, 3. So it's just looping over all the values that are inside that array. And now, so we're starting to get into the methods. So they're the methods because they call a function, and they call a function on each array element. So it's in an array, it's, you know, starts at when you're counting 0, 1, 2, but as you can see, the values are 1, 2, 3. So we're just going to unhighlight the regular version here and then the ES6 version. So the regular version, the for each method, as you can see, it's the method because we're calling a function, we're declaring a function here, and it's running that function with whatever value we put into it each time that we iterate over each element. And in the same way, ES6 is doing the same thing, except it's much cleaner because we can return the value with a arrow function, and then of course we place in our value right there. So we just, so it gets 1, 2, and 3. So very easy, 2 lines of code. It doesn't get better than that. Now next is the map method, and of course it's a method, same thing as a function, as we all know, I hope. So I'm just gonna unhighlight both of these. So the map method is ES6. Well, actually, I guess there was a map before that, so my bad. The only one so far that was introduced specifically for ES6 was the for of loop. Yeah. So okay, so map, and as we can see, creates a new array by applying a function to each array element. So if I remember correctly, the idea of creating a new array, a lot of these, I believe the for each, they have something, they call it mutating, so it mutates the array. So this map method would be something that would mutate. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't mutate the original array because it creates a new array. And I don't believe that is demonstratable on the command line, because I think it'll just show the same output. So as you can see here, yeah, we're returning each value multiplied by 2. So that works just fine. Well, actually, so like something like the for each, right? This would, I believe, it mutates the original array because it's not creating a new array. It's just console logging I'm not too sure about that actually, but I know for the map, because as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3 in this array, and it returned us 2, 4, 6, which is an entirely new array with different values. And then the original array, R right here, would not be changed. So let's see how it looks in the ES6 version. So as you can see, there's not too much difference. The major difference is that we're not declaring a function. We're using the arrow function syntax to return the value. Other than that, it's the same thing. Let's see here. So yeah, and then on to the next one. So we are going to be working with the reduce method, another method. So I'm just going to uncomment these two. So the reduce method is a reducer function that runs on each element of the array, and this would be something you could use to add numbers, to subtract numbers. And if I were to see, so this reducer is just finding the sum of all the numbers in the set. So 1, 2, 3 in the array, and then of course equals 6. And in the old before ES6, as you can see, it passes a function with 2 parameters. But when we look at the ES6 version, we can just use the arrow syntax, return it without calling return, and do the same thing. So not much difference there. Okay, so now we're almost there. So the next one is the filter method. So the filter method, it creates a new array, so it doesn't mutate the original array. Creates a new array with elements that pass a test, so it needs to pass a certain condition. And as you can see, in the original one, we are finding the modulus of the value. So that is the modulus operator, not the division. So it's returning whatever the modulus equals 0. So 2 and 4 are the only ones that 2 can go into, and there be no remainder. So the remainder would equal 0. And yeah. So then we look at the ES6 version, and if you haven't noticed, instead of doing these function declarations, we're just passing the arrow syntax, but it's the same thing. We're just calling the filter function, the filter method, passing a value, using an arrow function to return the value, and console logging it. That's it. Now these are interesting, the every and sum methods. So these ones are pretty neat because every method checks if all elements meet a condition. Sum method checks if any elements meet a condition, right? So in the case of, so if I were just to, let me just blank this one out. So if we run this, true, true. So it ran one every function here. So the every function is right here. And it's returning a value that's greater than 0. So 1, 2, 3 are all greater than 0. That's going to be true, every single one. Now this one is saying return a value greater than 0, some of them. Now all of them are true, but also some of them are true. So that would also be true. Pretty, you know, and if I put a 0 there, it would probably still return true. And then, of course, as we see, the ES6 version, it's the same thing. We're just not using a function declaration. We're using an arrow function. And then we're just, don't have to return it. It's returning it here. And we call it the same way. So yeah, that was a brief explanation of loops in JavaScript, normal JavaScript and ES6, and it's something that you should, be aware of and learn how to get good at. So JavaScript is kind of a weird language. It's kind of hard to learn, but it's a very powerful language, and it will pay dividends when you get the hang of it. So yeah, this is Matt, and I'm out.